Hello, my name is Marcel Stoetzler and I'm the program lead of the social sciences at Bangor University in North Wales in the UK. And I have the pleasure and the honor to try and explain to you what it is we are doing in the social sciences at Bangor. And I guess I should start with the phrase itself, social sciences, which is, if you think about it, a slightly odd kind of expression, social sciences. So it seems to be saying that we're having here a science of something that is the social. Now a science, obviously a bit like biology or chemistry or something, but of the social. Now the social is a rather, you will probably agree, is a rather vague and somewhat evasive and dodgy sort of thing to be the object of a science, very different from plants and rocks and planets and other things that kind of proper sciences deal with. So we have here a science that deals with something that at first sight anyway sounds quite a bit sort of non-sciencey in a strange sense. So we have here a very, very strange sort of science, and it's in the nature of this thing that different people will tell you very different things about what that actually is. And actually one of the things of studying is probably finding out over the course of many years, finding out exactly what this actually is. So maybe at the end of this you won't be that terribly much smarter about what it actually is that we are trying to sell you here. But anyway, I'll try anyway. So one way of trying to get behind the meaning of certain words or phrases or concepts is to look at them historically. So you can try to find out where does a certain concept come from. And in the case of social sciences, and it is the same with the related concept of sociology, and indeed the concept of society itself, which is sort of the principal name of the object of both the social sciences in a generic sense and sociology in a more specific sense, they date back to the late 18th century. So basically the period of the French Revolution, in the last decade of the 18th century. That's when the phrase social sciences was coined, and it was meant as a program meant for the consolidation and the defense, but also the ending, the bringing to a closure of the period of the French Revolution. So this science, this very modern, very specifically modern kind of science, had a specific, if you like, political purpose in the framework of the emerging modern state and the modern form of society that is associated with that period, the late 18th century, and then of course throughout the 19th century. That is the background, and that is from that background, if you know this historical background, the context from which the concept emerges, you know already quite a bit about what it is probably meant to do. So there are kind of two dimensions to it. One is that the modern state that emerges in that period needs data, it needs information, it needs to know who are the people who this modern state is about to govern. What are the characteristics? What is the nature of this society, which is, if you like, the object against which the modern state establishes itself as the governor of that thing, society, which is in itself a new concept emerging in that in that context. And the social science is a discipline that is meant, on the one hand, to help this new thing, the modern state, to govern society, and perchance to improve, to reform society in a certain direction. Question is obviously in what direction. So the word reform can of course mean all kinds of things, and it does mean very different things to different people. So there are ideas involved, and that is also something the social sciences, and in particular sociology as one of the key disciplines within these social sciences, are meant to develop. So the social scientists provide data and techniques and instruments for governing, but they also provide the ideas that drive the direction of what the modern state is meant to do vis-à-vis the new form of society that was emerging in that period. So these are the two strands that are sometimes going together, and sometimes they can be antagonistic, because the people who develop the ideas about the role of the state in relation to society and in relation to the individuals in particular might not always be the same ideas that the functionaries of that state have about their role and their task and the direction in which the further evolution, the development of modern society is meant to go. This picture, by the way, in case you're wondering, has nothing directly to do with what I'm talking about here. I just put it there because it is a very beautiful picture, and it is in one of the big lecture halls at Bangor University, and it's called the Hall of Illusions by a great artist called Edward Povey, who was at some point a student at Bangor, I think in the 1980s or so. The Hall of Illusions, obviously, that has something to do with education and growing up and the discovery of the concept of society in a sense, and history. So if in case you do actually come to Bangor, you should have a very close look at this painting, because it's a very impressive piece of art with a lot of interesting propositions on the concept of education, which is obviously the line of business we are in here. Now, the social science is meant, or you could define social science in terms of trying to understand the workings of society. And the fact that it emerges in the 18th and 19th century has to do with the fact that this is when the new type of society, which we still inhabit today to a very large extent, emerges as a new thing, a new object. People are puzzled. What is this new thing that's going on here? And social science is the attempt to try and understand what that is and how it works. So that involves observing social facts as they come to be known, basically thing-like aspects of that new society, but also to recover meaning. Meaning always refers, in the context we are discussing here, meaning always refers to the intentions the subjects, the individuals within society have when they act in society. And to recover meaning for a social scientist means to develop some kind of an empathy, kind of an understanding of what are possibly the intentions with which individuals act in society. So that is we sometimes call this the sociological imagination. So as a researcher, or also as a theorist in the area of sociology or the social sciences in general, you have to try to put yourself into the shoes of other people who are different from yourself by definition, because we're all in modern society, we're all supposed to be very different. Actually we're not that different, but to a very large extent, all individuals in modern society are different. That is already one of the ideas that characterize modern science, and as such, obviously, is an object of the discipline of sociology, to think about what does that mean to be an individual in modern society, let alone what is this thing, modern society. Now, what social scientists do, they observe, and from their observations, usually they try to predict tendencies within society. If they are involved in state governance, then perhaps they try to control these tendencies. The scientists deliver sort of recipes, instruments, kind of blueprints, if you like, for the officials of the state, how to act, how to react to certain things that are happening within society, and by chance to improve things, whereby, as I said, improve can mean very different things. So what one person thinks is a massive improvement, perhaps another person will think is a terrible idea to start with. And that has to do with the second strand that I mentioned before, which is the aspect of reflection. So social science reflects as much as observing and trying to control and improve things. Reflecting means critique. So you critique, to critique means to try and understand what something is, and to evaluate whether a certain change, a certain improvement is actually a good thing or perhaps a bad thing. Critique always involves negation. That is the case because when we say what something is, And even more so when we try to say what something should be, we need to negate, we need to say what it is not. Maybe I can give you an example for that. If a society claims about itself, I am a democracy, so say society in the form of state officials perhaps, or the media, or teachers, lecturers, says this is a democracy, then the critique would probably say, well, hang on, no, it isn't. That's a negation. So you're negating a claim that something or somebody makes about itself or him or herself. That is essentially what critique is, and it is essentially also what reflection is, because in reflection you reflect on what something is and what something is not. And out of that, the process of critiquing, reflecting, negating claims that are being made, emerges the possibility of change. Now, in the social sciences, very often we operate with terms that come in pairs of opposites, and probably one of the most fundamental ones is that of individual and society. Now, there are very different ways how in the social sciences we relate the individuals to society. So there's a sort of more optimistic version of how we conceive of that relationship. Social sciences are always about relationships. Everything is in the society, in the social sciences, relational to other things. And often these relations are termed in pairs of opposites, such as individual and society. Now, one view of the relationship between individual and society is that the individuals sort of grow out of society. So society is kind of the nurturing ground out of which individuals, in their individuality, in their difference, in their particularities, can emerge. That is sort of the slightly optimistic view of that relationship. On the other hand, society often also appears or is perceived by us and by others, by everybody. So to a very large extent, everybody in society is a sociologist, or actually has to be a sociologist, because to survive in society, you need to reflect on what that thing society is. Otherwise, it might crush you. Perhaps a little bit like in this graphic here, where society, and I think we all have experiences like that, society is this big, massive thing that is hovering above us and is not so much nurturing, but is rather oppressive and repressing us and the things that we would like to do. So we all would like to do all kinds of things that we may not and cannot do because of that thing, society, that's kind of hovering above us, and sometimes, in some situations, seems to threaten to crush our individuality and our desires to do this or that. I'm sure you all have some kind of idea what I'm thinking about here. Now I want to give one example of a text I like very much, a text that you're not likely to actually encounter when you when you study sociology, because it is a sort of a literary text. It's a text by Virginia Woolf. Obviously you know Virginia Woolf as a novelist, but she also wrote sort of pamphlets, sort of theoretical texts, but they're not sort of heavy theory. They're sort of sarcastic polemics in a sense. Basically, they are very long leaflets, but in this case, the leaflet is 300-400 pages long. So it's a kind of a pamphlet, a sort of a sarcastic, polemical intervention. And here she reflects on the word society. And I find that very interesting, because it reflects very well one of the principal usages of the concept of society in the tradition of sociology, on social theory. So she writes there, "The very word society sets tolling in memory the dismal bells of a harsh music. Shall not, shall not, shall not. You shall not learn. You shall not own. You shall not." Such was the society relationship of brother to sister. So she's referring to the relationship, the sex or gender relationship of men to women, for many centuries. And though it is possible that in time a new society may ring a carillon of splendid harmony, the day is far distant. Inevitably we ask ourselves, is there not something in the conglomeration of people into societies, the forming of societies in history, that releases what is most selfish and violent, least rational and humane in the individuals themselves. So you see in this piece of writing here, which is sort of semi-fictional text, if you like, there is a concept of society as being something that changes the nature of human individuals. So she seems to think that human individuals as such, if you abstract from society, are kind of rational and humane, and society seems to be that thing that changes that and turns us into something else. And this is how it continues. Inevitably, we look upon society, so kind to you, so harsh to us. Us here is women, obviously. She's writing from the perspective of women here. Kind to you, men, harsh to us, women, as an ill-fitting form. The word form here is very important, because society is a form that social relations take, that distorts the truth, deforms the mind, fetters the will. Inevitably, we look upon society as conspiracies that sink the private brother, nice guy, whom many of us have reason to respect, and inflate in his stead a monstrous male, loud of voice, hard of fist, childishly intent upon scoring the floor of the earth with chalk marks. You might think of the boundaries between countries, within whose mystic boundaries human beings are penned rigidly, separately, artificially, where he enjoys the dubious pleasures of power and dominion. So you have here a rather negative view of society, which is essentially identical to power. And you will find similar perspectives also in social theory. Now another very quick look at another text, or rather a painting that illustrates a very famous text, namely the text Leviathan by Thomas Hobbes, which is one of the earliest texts in basically what is modern social theory, the modern way of reflecting on this new object, the modern society and the state that is the political form of that modern type of society. And you see on this picture, I don't know if you can actually see it, so you would need to you would need to go much closer, but you can see here the body of this the sovereign, the king here, is formed by these individuals. That is very interesting. That is a very modern idea and central to modern social science, although it predates social science in the specific sense by more than a century. But that often happens, that particularly prescient people sort of preempt ideas that actually emerge somewhat later in history. But sometimes these earlier guys are particularly clear on what these ideas are, because in a certain sense there was an advantage to writing in the 17th century when most people weren't able to read. So people were less afraid to say kind of in a blunt manner what they wanted to say, because it would have relatively much fewer impact than saying things might have had, at least in the 19th and 20th centuries. So Hobbes is one of these guys, one of those dark writers of the modern period, the kind of precursors of social science, who speak certain unpleasant truths about modern society in a very clear manner. Very, very interesting. But I just want to point to this picture here, because one thing you can see, or I want to point to two things. One is the idea that the state is constituted by these individuals. So you have here in this picture, and as sociologists we might look at pictures as much as text or other things. You have in this picture an illustration of the idea of the relationship of individual to society and the state. And the other thing I wanted to point out is that this guy here, the sovereign, has two things in his hands: a sword and you might not necessarily recognize a bishop's staff, representing sort of the two sides that this new creature, the modern state, is characterized by the sword. Obviously reflects sort of the disciplinary and punishing and functions of the state, and the bishop's staff I think represents sort of the kind aspects of the modern state that have to do with spirituality, but also with welfare. So if you think that probably in that period it would have been the church that fulfills certain functions that nowadays are taken over by the welfare state. So you have this dualism, this dual nature of the modern state ruling over this society that is kind of depicted here very sweetly as this little village on that hill here. So that is pretty much the beginning of the discourse of modern social science, which is very nicely illustrated by that picture here. Now, more specifically, let's come to Bangor social science. These are the disciplines we are teaching in the social science. There's sociology, which is sort of, I am teaching sociology, so I'm slightly probably biased in that direction. For me, sociology is a slightly more generic part of the overall social sciences offering, probably slightly more conceptual, slightly more leaning towards theoretical generalizations and trying to conceptually understand what things are, like what is society, what is the individual. The individual itself, for sociology, is a product of modern society in the sense I indicated on the earlier slide. So it's not necessarily something that exists before society, as Virginia Woolf seems to assume. So modern sociology, or more contemporary sociology, would probably reject that presupposition in this text by Virginia Woolf. So the relationship between society and individual is probably central to the discipline of sociology. Then we have social policy, that is much more related to the two arms of the Leviathan figure that you just looked at, the sovereign, the modern sovereign, or rather you could say social policy and criminology and criminal justice are disciplines in the social sciences that study these two arms that the sovereign, the Leviathan, the modern state has. So social policy, all the kind of nice things the state does, the welfare system, or maybe not so nice. So some of our colleagues are rather critical about what the state in fact actually does. But in principle, these are issues about welfare, health, housing, social work, etc., etc. These are the kind of, if you like, the sort of the positive, productive things that the modern state is supposed to engage in. Whereas criminology and criminal justice is sort of probably more the other arm with a sword. That's sort of the two disciplines that come along with sociology that more specifically study these things. We also have a degree in politics, which again is much more conceptual and historical in its methodology, and we have a degree in policing. So you all know what policing is, although probably most of you know that more from the receiving end of what policing is about, but you can study it at university, and well, that will probably make you a policeman or woman. Now, sociology specifically is the study of society, of course, with all the precautions about what that word society actually means. A social science that involves the study of the social lives of people, individuals, groups, societies, and society. That is a thing I put there to confuse you, basically. This is something you will find happening quite a lot. One of our major aims is to confuse students. That's one of the principal ways of learning, is to get confused, right? Because getting confused means that you begin questioning the things that you thought you knew. And in the social sciences, as a matter of fact, we're actually talking about a lot of things that you already know. But maybe you know them the wrong way, or you know them in a particular way, and you will find out that there are other ways of knowing the exact same things. Now, society and societies. So usually, I think most sociologists probably think about societies in the plural. by which they basically mean countries, in reality nation states in most cases. But there's also a thing that I would refer to as society in a slightly more abstract sense, which is actually the world system in which we live. So in a sense, all the countries and nation states are part of one larger thing, which is basically a global society. And that society is perhaps in the singular. So there is an overall structure of which nation states are actually a part. So societies in the plural, in the sense of countries, that's not the limit. So we study also society at an even higher level of abstraction and generality. That's what sociology does very importantly, I think. Sociology is the study of our behavior as social beings, covering everything from the analysis of short contacts between anonymous individuals on the street, you could do sort of micro-sociology of fleeting encounters between people who don't even know each other, to the study of institutions of all sorts, up to all the way to global social processes. So basically we study pretty much anything. And the reason for that is that in the modern period, 19th and 20th centuries, and in the present, this strange thing, society, has expanded so enormously that there's nothing left outside of it. Which in a sense is good news for social scientists, because it means we can basically study pretty much anything. We can even study the rocks and the plants, because the rocks and the plants that you find when you go hiking up Snowdon, which is very highly recommended. We have some of the finest hiking in this area here. The rocks and the stones aren't actually, strictly speaking, outside society either, because the way, of course, the landscape has been shaped, that is already a social process. So in a sense, even the stones out there are nowadays, in the present period, part of society. Which, as I say, is good news for social scientists, because it massively increases the range of things we get to study, namely pretty much everything and anything. Methodologically, sociology is based on this sort of coming together of pretty much all studies of humankind, including history, psychology, anthropology, philosophy, legal studies, religious studies, ethnography, very important, economics. So all these studies, all these disciplines, which are of course disciplines in their own right within the university, but we draw on all on them in what we do as sociologists, because we are the specialists in the general. We do all the things everybody else does, but under the perspective of what does this mean in terms of society, in terms of societal processes. Now we have a discipline or a course called Criminology and Criminal Justice. I thought I'd throw in, just in case you're wondering, because I was wondering, I had to look it up myself initially, what's actually the difference. Now criminology is a discipline that studies basically the concept of crime. What is crime? Why do people commit crime? Who are the criminals and who are the victims? Whereas criminal justice is sort of the other side of the coin, if you like. What does it mean to police? How do the police operate? The courts and the prison system. So this is more about the institutions that deal with crime, whereas criminology is more about the concept of the crime itself or the societal processes. So you have here again, as I said before, in social sciences, most things come in pairs, like buses sometimes. They're always two at the same time. That sort of thing. So, but in our case, these pairs are pairs of opposites. So they're kind of covering kind of complementary aspects of sort of the same thing. So in a sense, of course, you can see from these two lists of concepts here, they are not totally different things. You cannot really separate them entirely, but they're different aspects of the same kind of thing. Oh, all right. So yes, I can hear that. You want to hear what modules we are actually teaching? Okay, so that's fine. I'll stop here. So I think it's a good idea to This is something you will find out in lectures. Sometimes you have to stop people going on about some theoretical issues. Now you want to know what are actually the modules that we teach. Now we can do that. Let's go through them in sort of chronological order. Year 1, you will study Understanding Society. That is a general introduction to the social sciences. Essential skills for academic success. That is basically how you study. What are the techniques of studying? And then you will study in introductory modules to criminology and to criminal justice. Furthermore, you will have a module called From Cradle to Grave. As you can probably guess, I assume, maybe you can't, but you might be able to guess that this is a module that introduces you to social policy in the widest sense of the word. And then there is Power, Freedom and the State, very serious, heavy stuff, which is obviously on the concept of the state and is also related to criminology and criminal justice. You will also be able to study other modules. For example, there's a module on human geography, which is not actually in our school, it's in the School of Geography, but human geography, which is the study of landscapes that are created by humans, such as cities in particular, is actually a social science. Sort of. So these people over there in geography are also sort of social scientists, and you can take modules like this if you like. You can also take modules from within our own school in religion and philosophy, such as a module on Islam or about logic. Very much recommended, because we do appreciate it if students try to, in their essay writing, to apply certain principles of logical reasoning, and this is something you will be taught by our colleagues in philosophy. And there's also a module on modern politics in action, which again is more a historical module about looking at politics in a historical perspective. Year 2, you will do a research methods module, you will do classical social theory, you will do contemporary debates, that's where you debate all kind of contemporary social and political issues. You will do a work placement, which is where you will get to do some work, but it won't do you any harm, I guess. It is a way of improving your chances later on to actually get a job once you come out of this experience of studying. Very highly appreciated by students who want to experience the practical side of certain job opportunities that they might want to choose later. And it is sort of, being at university is sort of an opportunity to get into one of those, because we organize how to get them. And then more theory from criminology. Other modules you will be doing in year 2 are modern ideas and movements. That is sort of again a historical module about social and political ideas and how they are related to social movements in modern history. Then there's crime and the media. You will be watching lots of films in there, very popular module. You will have a module on the concept of poverty and inequality on a world level. I guess that's a rather more depressing sort of module, whereas identity and diversity to me sounds more like something about multiculturalism and the ways people are different. This will be about sex and race and ethnicity and religious beliefs and all kind of things being increasingly diverse in the context of modern society, or maybe not so diverse. That will be something you will be exploring there. And then again, more heavy stuff on policing, security and the state. Obviously that is again in the criminology and criminal justice area. And you might be feeling like choosing something completely different. Sex and society, that is actually a module from the philosophy and religious studies group, although it doesn't sound like that. It is. So you will have a philosophical and religious studies perspective on sex and society. There's also political philosophy and the Atlantic slave trade, which obviously is again a history module you may want to choose. Now, year 3, you will do a dissertation. That's where you do your own thing, counting for 2 modules. So that is like valued as much as 2 of all the other modules. So you will choose your own subject matter, and you will be given a supervisor who will help you actually doing the research for that that will result in your dissertation. You will have more theory, theorizing society and politics, similar to the theory module for social sciences in year 2, just even more difficult, rather horrible stuff. I tell you, I happen to be teaching this, so I can tell you this is really you will be crying and sweating. Then there's race, democracy, and political ideology. That says pretty much what it is on the tin. Gender perspectives on youth crime, more crime, as well as punishment and power. So this is again the criminology and criminal justice department. Issues in housing and policy, and then you could choose a history module such as the radical 60s. That sounds quite exciting and lots of fun. Well, that's about it, except actually there's one more little thing I did want to mention, and that is that you remember perhaps the phrase that the only thing that is worse than being exploited is not to be exploited. Supposedly that was said by an economist. She was actually referring to rural poverty in India. Okay, we are not quite in that sort of context, but still not being employed and exploited is no fun in society. So we all need to have a job, as in gainful employment. Now the question that you're probably asking yourself is, how does all this get me into gainful employment? Now if you do a law degree, the case is pretty straightforward. You will probably end up being a lawyer. If that's the kind of thing you are looking forward to, then this is probably what you should be doing, which means you're sort of in the wrong film here. If you're not planning anything as straightforward as that, and that's probably why you're looking at this social science video here, you're asking yourself, what will I actually be with a social science degree? Well, probably not a lawyer, but what you will be is what I call a specialist for the general, which means sort of, it's not exactly clear what it is what you will be, but you will be somebody who has acquired or demonstrated a whole list, an enormous, fantastic list of what we call transferable skills. Transferable because they are skills that you learn in one context and you apply them in any kind of other context. And rumor has it, actually not rumor, this is scientifically proven, that employers love this kind of stuff. So employers apparently love people who learn something that is actually in itself rather vague, as social science is inevitably. Well, I should say that some of our social science degrees have a very clear job profile. Like if you do social policy, then you are probably going to be working in the area of social policy, right? I'm sort of talking here from the sociology perspective, the sort of more generic side of things here, which probably most of you will end up doing more or less. Now, this list of fantastic skills include research skills, knowing how to research something, how to find an answer to a question. To be curious, that in itself is a quality that is of huge importance in our society, because there are lots of people around who are not curious at all, and I suspect they will never get done anything very noteworthy at all in whatever area they are working. So it is important to treasure and to develop your curiosity about things. Analytical ability, to be able to break down things and analyze them. A flexible and adaptable approach to learning. Flexible and adaptable means something doesn't work, you try something else, right? So you don't just stick to one method or one way of asking a question, and that is pretty much what we do here. Critical evaluation, so you ask whether something is actually a good idea or not, which involves self-reflection, because you need to reflect on your own way of looking at things. You have to reflect on, am I actually right on this? So you're not only critical about what other people tell you, in particular lecturers and teachers and all kinds of other people, but also you need to be critical about your own opinions. And that's probably the hardest thing to do, because we are, or most of us are probably quite married to our opinions on all kinds of things. And the process of studying certainly involves to develop the ability to question your own firm convictions. Not necessarily to get rid of them, but at least to check whether they are really worth having, or maybe there are better ones available. The ability to work to deadlines. Well, I'm slightly skeptical about that one, but it's a nice idea. Creativity, absolutely. From experience, I can tell you students develop enormous creativity, in particular when it comes to finding excuses why they don't meet deadlines. Logical thinking, we had that already. Team working, working together with other people, hugely important, because very few things in the modern world are done by single individuals. We all work more or less in teams with other people. Self-organization, and in particular self-organization within a team, that is particularly difficult and important. And communication skills, that is important, because you may know an awful lot. If you're not able to let other people know what you know, then you might just as well not know it, because nobody will know about it, right? So communication, to give presentations, say, to talk, discuss in the classroom, these are absolutely crucial parts of your studying experience, because that teaches you how to express yourself. And I suspect, I don't want to make any unwarranted claims, except when I do, but I guess that is particularly important in the social sciences, because we do a lot of debating and questioning and discussing things, much more in fact than simply learning certain things that are already established, because, as you might have sensed from this entire presentation, not much is actually fixed and set in stone in the social sciences, because we are dealing with an object that is constantly changing and evolving, and we are never totally, absolutely sure what it actually is, this mysterious thing called society. Now, to end, I just wanted to throw in one technical term that actually comes from anthropology: social bricolage. That is something social scientists do. Bricolage is exactly the thing I just tried to explain. You're taking one technique or a concept from one context, and you apply it to some other context to solve a completely different problem for which it was not developed. So one often cited example of bricolage is for example the use of safety pins in punk fashion. So a safety pin is probably, or at least at the point when it was invented in that way or redeployed in that way, is probably the last thing you think of, or at that point you were thinking of in the context of fashion. But through bricolage, to the transfer of one technique to another area, it became that, and it is now very much, obviously, sort of an element of fashion. So this is, so to be a bricoleur, that is very much what a social scientist is about, to take things from one context and schlep them to another and see what happens. Try out the effects of transferring things and ideas from one area to another. Well, thank you very much for your attention, and if you like to, you're very welcome to email me on this email address that's here on the last slide. Thank you very much. Bye.